Hi folks, I hope all is well with you. Things are going well here. I'm busy working away on the framework and writing episodes for Season 5 of the Troubles podcast, which will hopefully be released in the first quarter of 2024. Before we get into this special episode, some news. The Troubles podcast is going live in the form of an event in Dublin City Centre on Thursday, January 25th, 2024. Looking back on the last season, the interview I had with the academic Gardai O'Faolain proved to be the most popular episode of the season, so Gardai will be joining me on stage for a chat. The format will be fairly simple. I'll introduce the podcast and talk a bit how it got made, before jumping into my chat with Gardai. We will then save some space for audience questions at the end. The venue is an intimate venue upstairs in 4 Dame Lane, and tickets will cost €15. And there is also an early bird discount as well as a discount code specifically for Patreons. Tickets can be purchased at puntcomedy.com, that's puntcomedy.com/event-details/the-troubles-live-podcast. That's a bit of a mouthful, so I'll make sure to leave a link in the show notes as well as anywhere I post on socials. I'm looking forward to meeting some of you there. In other news, the Troubles podcast has picked up 2 awards at the 2023 Irish Podcast Awards this year. The first one was in the history category, and then the podcast went on to win the overall Podcast of the Year 2023, which was an incredible honour for me. I only wish I was there to receive it. Myself and John from the Troubles archive were outside celebrating the initial win, and I had no idea there was a second award coming. This is a significant milestone for me, and I wouldn't have gotten here without you, the listener. So as a thank you for tuning in, I'm releasing this special episode in between seasons. I published this chat to my Patreons earlier this year, but it's a very interesting one and I wanted to make sure it reached a wider audience. Earlier this year, I sat down and had a chat with Kevin Owens. He was a soldier in the Irish Army during the Troubles and explained what life was like then. From searching Irish lakes for Libyan arms to dealing with the Gardai, who may or may not have been helping out the IRA. Kevin's story is a fascinating one, and there is a lot more to it after he left Ireland. He joined the US Army and ended up serving in Iraq and Afghanistan a number of times, so we do spend some time talking about that aspect of his life. I hope you enjoy this chat as much as I did, and I'll see you in Season 5.
Okay, well, I guess I'm here to chat to you today, Kevin, to maybe tell me a little bit about yourself and your history and where that kind of intersects with, I guess, the Troubles in Northern Ireland. So, yeah, tell me about yourself.
Okay. Yeah, like I said offline, I'd hate to try to represent myself as somebody who grew up in the midst of the Troubles, like people who grew up in Northern Ireland. I grew up south of the border, in Dundalk, which, you know, growing up, they used to call it Little Belfast because all the IRA guys would do illegal stuff in the north and then jump across the border and safe haven in the south. And it was a very IRA kind of safe haven town, right? And it was known for it. Growing up, like I was telling you offline, I remember I heard that the Warren Point bomb, which was in the 70s, a massive bomb, killed 18 British soldiers. That was not that far up the road from where I am, and you know, I live along the coast, so that sound just echoed across the water.
The two.
I only remember hearing one a long time ago, obviously, but I remember my father, we were out hunting, and he said, that's a bomb in Northern Ireland, right away. He knew exactly what it was. And I know there was a second bomb, but, you know, I just remember the one, but I'm sure I heard both.
Well, it was, from what I remember, now I haven't done an episode on this, I did mount back the same day, but it was one, first bomb was to kind of bring in the response team, and the second bomb was waiting for them as well. So
yeah, it was bales of hay on the side. I actually walked the terrain where the guy detonated the bomb. When I was in the army later on, we used to patrol out there because the command wire was ran into the water, which separated Northern Ireland and Southern, and out on the southern side, and that's where the bomber hooked up the command wire to detonate the bomb. The British Army returned fire and hit a British tourist that was on vacation in the south and walked down to see what the noise was. And they opened fire and killed, British citizen. But so I heard that. And growing up, it was always kind of on the periphery, the IRA in Northern Ireland. But in the same way the American public got numb to the violence in Iraq and Afghanistan, people got numb to the violence in Northern Ireland. And because we were very close to the border, we got the BBC, the Northern Ireland News, right? Because it was all antennas. So people used to call it the bad news program because there was the RTE, there was the regular news, and then at the end, there was the Northern Ireland News. And it was all bombings and shootings and fires, and it was just, there was nothing good that came out for years and years and years.
So then you went to school, and then you decided you wanted to get into the Irish Army. Is that correct?
I did, yeah. I didn't go in the Irish Army to do any kind of counter-terrorist stuff or anything like that. I just thought it'd be a cool job. And back then, I went in the Army in 85, right out of high school, and there was no jobs. You went to England, you went to America, or you went on the dole. There wasn't a lot of options for guys, right? The French Foreign Legion was one of the options I was heavily looking at because I just wanted to do something. So the Irish Army didn't recruit that much. It wasn't like, in the American Army now, we go in and just, if you walk past the recruiting office, they'll drag you in and make you sign. We had to put our names down. And then it was like maybe up to a year later, they actually called us in for an interview. And I went, again, different than in the States where all the training is centralized around a few bases. I trained in Dundalk to serve in Dundalk in the infantry. So I went in there, did about 6 months of basic training. It was really good. And then when I got out, graduated, I was on the border, the Northern Ireland border, doing border patrols, checkpoints, searches, cash escorts, explosives escorts, which I don't know if the Irish Army still do that. I doubt it. But anytime large amounts of cash were moved around the country, they would have a military escort because the cops were not armed. So they'd have a police car, 2 cops, they'd have a Land Rover in the front, 4 soldiers, the cash armored truck, and then a Land Rover in the back. And it was because of the IRA threat. Now, it wasn't like the IRA couldn't take the money if they wanted to, but they would have to kill 8 soldiers and 2 cops to do it. And that kind of publicity, it just wasn't worth it, right? It's more of a deterrent than anything else. Same thing. Yeah, same thing with explosives. If explosives were being used for a quarry, then we would go and pick up the explosives at a facility, bring it to the quarry, watch it being used, burn whatever was not used. And that was just regular kind of...
But I think that was where... I haven't got too much in my head now, but I think that was where they did initially get some of their explosives.
Probably.
Stealing from quarries. Yeah, probably before there was an avant-garde.
Probably that's why we had to do that.
Reactionary.
But we patrolled the border, we did checkpoints, we did searches, we did all kinds of stuff with the police. So we were just there as what they call an aid to the civil power to back up the police because they were not armed, right? But there was never a sense that this is our fight. And it was the Irish government looked at it in that way too. Probably smart. They looked at it like, yeah, we'll do enough. But as long as it doesn't spill across the border, it's not really affecting us. Now, when it did spill across the border, like Desi O'Hare, I was on searches for him. Like weapons that were brought in, that we were on searches for them. Big events, we would get pulled in there whenever people would kind of get out of hand. I remember being on border patrol. We called it MSG, Mobile Security Group, and we were, I can talk about it now because it's decades ago, but there was 16 of us at a time, right? And we were in 4 Land Rovers. So a non-commissioned officer, a driver, and 2 privates in the back, and I was a private. And we were on border patrol. I remember sitting in our MSG office watching the news, and there was a big, massive operation. Anytime the British had to do stuff close to the border, they would want Irish troops on the southern side, so the IRA couldn't shoot at them and snipers and all that kind of stuff to give them coverage, right? So we would have to do that sometimes. But I remember one time I was watching TV, and there was a British Army officer being interviewed, and he said, yes, we have a battalion of Irish soldiers on the southern side during this operation. And we were all looking at each other. There was four guys out there. And I was like, where the hell did they come from, Purely optics. Yeah, purely optics. Now, we didn't get a lot of abuse from civilians, but if you drove through Dundalk late at night when people were coming out of the pubs, they would throw bottles at you and call you Maggie Thatcher soldiers and all that kind of thing. So we would avoid the city centre during that late Saturday night time. And there was other ways to get around the town, and it didn't really. We weren't really like, there was a couple of riots. Ian Paisley came to Dundalk one time. He was on trial for something, and I was in a riot platoon with shields and batons and rifles, and we were all staged, waiting to go in. And there was trouble. There was some petrol bombs thrown, but they didn't launch us in there, right? We did, during basic training, you did a lot of anti-riot, riot control training. That was part of it, and it's very hard for Americans to understand or to wrap their head around soldiers being on the streets, because it's against the law here, right? You can't use American soldiers against its citizens, part of the Constitution. But so to have soldiers on the street stopping and searching cars and searching houses and riot control type stuff is very it's just very foreign to the American audience. But all the stuff that we did was not really soldiering for war. It was soldiering for internal security purposes. Right from the get-go, right? Because the Irish Army doesn't have a war army, right? It has a small defense force, but everything I did was geared to, or most of the stuff we did was geared towards internal security, because of the North. And the Northern Ireland border is not a line on the ground; it's a line on a map, and it is all kinds of little roads going across it, fields and hills, and we knew, especially our non-commissioned officers, they knew exactly where the border was. And I think we had 28 border crossings that we had to patrol in our area. Yeah. And it was a lot of stuff. And we did 24 hours on, 24 hours off. We did 7 24-hour duties a month. So we would do, let's say you're on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. And then the next week you'd kind of be on an 8 to 5 normal day. And then the next week you'd start Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, right? So you do 7 of those 24-hour duties a month. And it actually is quite tiring. But at a certain point, I wanted to go and do something else. So I went to selection for the Army Ranger Wing, which is the counter-terrorist unit in Ireland, right? And
can you, sorry, just because I'm totally new at all this. So the Army, how's that different being just the regular?
It's a special operations unit. You have to go to selection, and you have to go through a lot of tough stuff to get selected and to be allowed in. You once you're in, you get specific training. You have different weapons, different gear, different trucks. Pretty motivated unit, great bunch of guys. I still know some of them. I just wanted to do something, and they're parachute qualified. They're snipers. They have divers. They have big boats. They have different equipment. Like we had divers looking for weapons sunk to the bottom of lakes that supposedly come in from Libya. But again, not utilized as much as it could have been, because unless things got bad, they weren't going to pull us in there, right? We did look for weapons. We did hit some targets looking for whenever, it was only when the IRA came across the border, loyalists came across the border and started robbing banks and stuff like that the Irish government would put up a lot, and then they would shut it down, right? We used to do covert observation posts up in the mountains on IRA training camps that, people would hear fully automatic machine gun fire, and they'd report to the police, and the police it'd go down through the filter and come down to us, and we would infiltrate and overwatch that position. But it was, if anybody, the Gardai were heavily infiltrated, the Irish Army were heavily infiltrated at that point, and they're just, I went there for better training, I went there for better opportunity, I went there to do cool stuff, and I spent about 4 years there, 4.5 years, and then I get out of the Irish Army.
Wait, that's a lot. There's a lot there. So the Gardaí were heavily infiltrated, and the Army were heavily infiltrated by IRA sympathizers. By what do you mean?
So this is purely my opinion, but it seemed like if we were going up to Donegal to do a border operation, we would not check in at the local army base. We would go straight there and do our thing and leave, because it was pretty known that if you check in at the local base, then it would get to the IRA or get to, that
somebody there.
Somebody there would say too much, right? There's actually documented. Do you remember? I don't know if you've got to that one yet. Remember the 2 RUC officers came across the border into it wasn't Carlingford, it was Omead.
It's not the Spring incident, the Spring Hill incident.
It's the one where they had a big Dishka heavy machine gun mounted on a vehicle, and they blew the crap out of the car and killed both of them. Did an armored vehicle, but they shot it up with a heavy machine gun. It was proven that they came in, so 2 British Army high-ranking RUC officers came across the border into Dundalk to have a conference about border security. And they were in an unmarked car. It was armored, but they were in civilian clothes on. And they had their a conference. And when they went back across the border, as soon because the IRA didn't want to do it in the south, as soon as they crossed the border, they were boxed in on multiple sides, and they had a heavy machine gun. They peppered the car and killed both of them. It was proven later on that a phone call was made from the police station in Dundalk to the IRA to tip them off. Right? That's another fascinating story. That's a good one for you in the future.
Yeah, cover that shit.
The book Bandit Country, which deals with Crossmaglen, basically. You have it there?
Somewhere.
Yeah. That it's in that book. He talks about it. It's funny. It's also in that book. There was a farm along the border. I'm not going to say the guy's name, but it was half in the north and half in the south. And he was a very well-known IRA senior member, and he was a smuggler, right? You just bring in the diesel in the south and bring it into the north and all that. So when I was on Border Patrol one night, we were called out to that farm. The British Army had an OP, an observation post, watching his house, and he freaking disarmed one of the Brits and beat his ass and dragged him into the south. And we showed up, and they put this British soldier who looked like he was 12 in the back of the police car. And we left, and we drove around the border, and we were not allowed to talk to the British Army, but we would talk to the Gardai would talk to the RUC would talk to the British Army, right?
So you could talk to the British Army?
No, we weren't allowed.
Interesting.
We weren't allowed. And it's publicity, right? Somebody takes a picture of that. Now it's cross-border collusion, and, it's the optics of it, right? So it was, like, we were at it to the Brits all the time along the border, on their side. But yeah, we just kept ourselves to ourselves and let the Gardai talk to the RUC. It doesn't look as bad, right? There was, I remember doing big border operations where they would bring up soldiers and Gardai from down the country, and I remember standing on the road with a Gardai that was stopping and searching every car, and the local Gardai was getting really upset that he was doing that. Like it was, I was like, wow, this guy's really mad, because I guess you were
protect his own, to protect himself, or just to be sympathetic to Lao?
He was just, I think probably both, and that's purely my opinion, right? And then again, when Thatcher came in for the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1991, I can't remember what year it was, but we did security. We did. We were. There was a huge fear that the IRA had surface-to-air missiles and they would shoot down her airplane. So we did a lot of periphery type stuff, but direct action against the IRA, we really didn't do that. There was a huge effort put in to show that we were not the SAS, right? And the SAS at that time, because we were dressed similarly and all that, all that black gear with the MP5s and all this, all psychological, right? But the SAS at the time were have this shoot to kill policy thing was going on, lock all, the Gibraltar killings, and it was a huge political storm. So we sent guys over to France, and they trained with GIGN, the French counter-terrorist police, Group Intervention de Gendarmerie Nationale, right? And they're police, but they're counter-terrorist police. And they came back, and they were pushing all this minimum force stuff on us, right? And soldiers don't do minimum force that well. And they actually had us on the range with targets with guns, trying to shoot them in the shoulder to drop their gun. When anybody who's ever been in a gunfight knows how ridiculous that is. It's just not a thing. It's just ridiculous standard. And at the time, we did it, but we really didn't believe in it. We knew we'd never do it in a real gunfight. But they actually had us doing this shoulder shooting for minimum force. It's just complete BS. And it was developed by somebody who's never been in a freaking gunfight. It was never going to happen. But it was, it was a great experience. I didn't see us as being against the IRA. I actually saw us as being a force to stop loyalists coming into the South bombing, because the IRA weren't doing stuff in the South generally. Sometimes it's built over, but not that.
The feuds, I guess, and stuff with the INLA and stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
So, but what was there many instances where that did happen, where loyalists were coming in and you?
Nah, there was only a couple. There was a bomb in my street when I was a kid. And I don't know if anybody knows about this thing, but I've talked about it. It was right outside my house. I was like 10, and we were coming back from school, and they had the whole street cordoned off. And of course, we're kids, so we just go into the fields, and we go around the back way and go into our house. And they'd evacuated all the houses, and my mother was still in there cooking dinner. Nobody told her. And I talked about this in a podcast later, like 2 years ago maybe. I think I was telling Andy Stump or somebody, and my brother reached out to me and he said, "Do you know why she was still in there?" And I was like, "I have no idea." And he told me that the Gardai had told one of her neighbors to go around every house and evacuate everybody. And the guy they told was having a fight with my old man, like one of these neighbor fights, and he purposely skipped our house. What a dick. What a dick. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty wrong when you think about
That's pretty bad.
stakes. Like,
That's pretty bad. And it was a massive bomb. Yeah, some of the training in especially in both in the regular army and the Ranger Wing, I went to a course in Dublin one time, and we learned how basically to make bombs and IEDs and because if you're searching a barn, you have to look for components, right? You have to understand what the smells mean. You have to understand what ammonium nitrate and fuel oil smells like, and you're looking at mercury tilt switches and homemade stuff. So they sent us this course specifically for that for a couple of weeks. And learned how to search houses and not diffusing, but understanding components. And I don't know if I ever used it in Ireland, but I used it extensively when I went to Iraq and Afghanistan later on. In the American Special Forces.
your ability to
My ability, and I knew, I went to Afghanistan first, so people were talking about IEDs like it was a new thing. I was like, I grew up with IEDs. We didn't call it that. There were fucking culvert bombs or roadside bombs or booby traps, but it's the same thing. So I knew a lot about it just from growing up. And we went to that course, and it helped because I went to Lebanon twice as well. And, not a lot of people get killed in Lebanon, but some do. And there's mines in Lebanon and stuff like that. So it was a really good education very early on in my career that kind of stayed with me the rest of my career. And we would use buried wire detectors, metal detectors, and we would search. Like you'd find an abandoned house, let's say, a derelict house in the Republic, and if there may be a cache of weapons in it, right? So we'd go out there, we'd set up a cordon, we'd do a sweep around it, we'd search with metal detectors, we'd go in, we'd take things off, and it wasn't that, I don't think the fear was that the IRA would booby trap it, because they didn't do that. There was a slight fear, actually, which is unrealistic, that the SAS would come across the border and booby trap it, if it was close to the border. And then I think the bigger fear was that it was just unstable. There was a lot of IRA guys died early on in the conflict from boiling petrol and stuff like that. It's pretty dangerous stuff if you don't know what you're doing. Yeah.
I'd imagine it took I guess whatever course you did in Dublin, like, somewhere along the way, the IRA had to earn these things, so where do they get this intelligence from?
Trial and error. Trial and error. A lot of times there was some of the ingredients in homemade explosives are carcinogenic, and it turned out that a lot of guys were dying later on because they were breathing in all these fumes, and they had no safety, had no masks or anything like that, and they were just learning as they went. Sometimes you learn by it blowing up. I heard a story once, and I can't attest to its truth, but it's a cool story. That the IRA early on in placing bombs, they would put detonating a bomb is nothing more than completing a circuit, right? There's a million ways to do it. So you take a clothes peg and you put something in there that won't conduct electricity, right? And you have a positive and negative going to the clothes peg. So when you pull that out, it either detonates it in the case of a tripwire, or it arms it, right? And they early on in the conflict, they had, let's just say, a box that was a bomb, and there's a hole in the side of the box, and there's a clothes peg on the inside of the box, and the arming switch is a cord attached to this piece of material where you pull it. Now the bomb's armed, right? That makes sense, I hope. And they had a case where, like, if you're an IRA bomber, you're not emplacing the bomb generally. You're a skilled technician, Yeah, you don't want him getting caught. So you get a young kid or somebody who's trying to prove himself to place the bomb. And when they'd place the bomb, they had to pull that arming switch to arm it. And they had some times where the kid would not arm the bomb because he'd lose his nerve, basically. So the IRA started putting the kid's name and address on the arming switch. So he had to pull it out.
Yeah.
To retrieve his, or the Brits had come.
Yeah, to not be identified.
You know, yeah. I don't know. I can't testify to the accuracy of that, but it sounds like it might be true. And,
it's
complex.
Hard to know the intent. Yeah. Like what
Innovation, man. Innovation. But I grew up, like in the 80s when I was at school, when the hunger strikes were going on, we would go into school and there would be IRA funerals. There would be people in black balaclavas with black flags lined along the road in Dundalk. And coming out of school, and I would imagine it was probably done to influence those young minds. At the time, people are coming out of school, right? And you're getting, my father was adamantly against us joining the IRA, and I think that's why. But again, it's geography. Had I been born a couple of miles north, I would have been knee deep in it.
Geography, and I hate to say it, but it's something I've been saying more and more lately. It's socioeconomics. If you're in a really where there's no prospects, no future, that's where paramilitarism kind of thrived,
It really is.
There is, what was it? It's marching season now, so that means that, like, I think it's the Apprentice Boys in Derry march now, and they're a very, kind of similar to the Orange Order, I guess, with a very pro-unionist, but, like, there was footage on Twitter 2 days ago of, like, a boy, obviously, like, 9 or 10, running with a bunch of young people with a petrol bomb in his hand. Like, that's still happening. And a part of me feels like a lot of that is born out of growing up in an area where that was the norm for a long time,
I think it gives you a sense of purpose when you don't have one. And you think about all your mentors, this is what they do. This is what they did. And kids grow up hearing about stories about the Troubles and the Great Struggle and the IRA. It's funny because I talked to another Oisín on my podcast a couple of times, and we talked about the War of Independence in the 1920s. And he said something very true. He said, the Irish look at the 1920s and the War of Independence with freaking rose-colored glasses. Like it was all historic, and it was all, and nobody ever got executed for being an informant, and nobody got tortured. And of course, all those things happened. That's what it is. It's ugly. And, but you look at the recent Troubles, and the stuff that happened there, it happened in the 20s. It just wasn't documented as well.
I asked I asked Bertie Ahern about this 2 months ago. So Bertie Ahern, for anyone, my listeners probably know, but he was the leader of Ireland for a while. But Bertie Ahern's father was in the IRA on the anti-treaty side, on Devon Ayre's side. So he fought in the Civil War. And I was like, so, what is your opinion of the difference? And he was like, well, first off, it's time. It's maybe 100 years, whatever. It's been 100 years. And the second off, he still attests, he says, like, the IRA back then were not placing bombs that were killing children. They were killing a lot, civilians were getting killed, members of the British Army were getting killed, but kids, innocent children were getting killed. So now I don't know enough about the Civil War to know whether that was based off, but
yeah, I don't know. I remember seeing a movie years ago about the IRA. It was about the IRA. I can't remember the name of it. And there was a young volunteer in the 80s, and he was struggling with the violence and all that. And there was an older volunteer that he was talking to. And he said to the older guy, he said, it's not like it was in 1916. And the older guy said, it wasn't like 1916 in 1916, which is a great line, right? Yeah, when you're embroiled in it, it doesn't look like that. When I was in the Irish Army, the infantry, we did a funeral, like firing the shots over graves for old IRA guys from the 20s. That when they were dying off back then in the 80s, we would be on a detail to go out there and dress uniform, rifles, and we would do the whole fold the flag, put it on the knob.
The Irish Army doing that now.
I know, right? Yeah. But
strange image.
But again, it just shows you the mindset. And again, rose-colored glasses, all kinds of nasty stuff happened during the War of Independence. I mean, we were killing each other in the Civil War.
Yeah.
But the passage of time kind of cleans everything up. So, serving in the Irish Army along the border, it was, there was guys who served that were from Belfast, Catholics from Belfast, from Newry, from all over Northern Ireland, all over the whole country. And I'm there was always rumors about guys who were in the IRA or not the IRA. I never saw anybody get prosecuted. I never saw anybody get outed for it. But it was almost a distant conflict. Like, it really was. It was right up the road, and it was in your daily life, but it wasn't something that affected you daily.
That's one of the things I hear time and time again, especially when I speak to people like Jim Al, like I was saying, one of the hundred men, about the Irish government's response to the Troubles. And a lot of them just said they did absolutely nothing, and they wanted to do absolutely nothing. And I think a lot of people are quite, I don't want to say bitter, but you know what I mean? They feel like the Irish government did the absolute least they could do. They set up like a triage, I think, during internment and stuff. They did for people fleeing from conflict. But yeah, again, it was a very difficult tightrope for them to walk, I guess.
What, did you, but in hindsight, why would they get pulled into that conflict for the British government, who did horrific things in Ireland? And I'm not pro-IRA. I'm just looking at it from both sides.
Yeah, from a pedagogical perspective.
Do you remember Churchill? He verbally attacked De Valera about the Irish's response in the Second World War. I don't know if you remember that. Like, he was really pissed off that the Irish were neutrality in World War II, right? And De Valera said, I want you to think of a scenario where the Nazis invade and take England and brutally subjugate the population, and in 100 years come under attack from somebody else, and they ask the British people to help them fight. He said that's the exact same thing. Like, I butchered it, but that's the gist of the argument.
Yeah. And again, the big argument is, were they really neutral? And in a lot of cases they probably weren't. I know there was some story about Cork and harbouring Nazi U-boats or something.
Really? I know that Hitler had a plan to take Ireland and as the launching base, but the British were ready to invade if that happened. But look, Irish history is full of violence. It's very, very harsh. I'm so glad.
The look of the Irish.
I know, right? Yeah, I don't know either. I'm so glad there's relative peace in Northern Ireland now. It was a horrific time, and like I said, you become very numb to it, growing up in it. And I've been to Northern Ireland a bunch of times. And people think it's all Catholic and Protestant thing. I dated Protestant girls when I was freaking teenager in Ireland, like in Dundalk, just south of the border. Nobody really cared. It just became a byproduct of it.
So hang on then. So let's say, you were in the Ranger Division of the Irish Army.
Ranger, yeah.
Ranger. Mm-hmm. And then, so what was the next step after that? Was that when you moved to the States then? Or was that...
I did. Yeah, I got out. I got a little disillusioned, and I got out. And I went to the States, but I didn't have a green card, so I was illegal for like a year. And I came back. Actually, I didn't come back. I went to Somalia, Africa, and I worked as a security contractor right off the Black Hawk Down, that whole incident with the Americans. And I actually worked with some SAS guys over there as a security.
Sorry, I'd like to know that, but I'm just curious. Did you get disillusioned with your career prospects in the Irish Army, or just with your position in Ireland, or was it, nothing to do with the Troubles, or?
Nah, nothing to do with the Troubles. I wanted to keep climbing. And I'd done almost anything that was available to me. And then me and another guy who I'm actually going to podcast, we started a survival business, teaching people how to do rock climbing and navigating. And our commander came in and said, you can't do that. You have to stop it. And I just, I have a bad temper. So I just said, I'm getting out. And you could get out of the Irish Army, not like the American Army, you're contractually obligated to serve your time. In the Irish Army, you could pay. Back then, you could pay to get out. So I'd done 3 years, re-enlisted for 3 more. Re-enlisted for 3 more, but I only did 1, and then I put in a application for discharge by purchase. I paid money, and they let me out. So I did 7 years, and then I contracted in Somalia as a security guy in Mogadishu for a while, which was crazy. And then I got my green card and went to the States. And I joined the American Army in 1996 and started at 29 years old and started right at the bottom as a private E1 again. And I couldn't go to special ops because I joined with a green card. I wasn't a U.S. citizen. So I had spent 6 years in the infantry before I got my citizenship. And then I went to special forces, and I spent 18 years in the American Special Forces.
Wow. Okay. So in your infantry stage, was that when you were during the, was that when you were stationed over in Iraq and Afghanistan, or was that when you became special forces?
No, I was special forces, and when I was in the infantry, I went to Kuwait, I went to Bosnia for not Bosnia, Kosovo for 9 months in the infantry. I was stationed in Fort Hood, Texas for 2 years, and stationed in Germany for 4. And then I went to Special Ops Selection, and then I went to Afghanistan and Iraq multiple times, back to back to back.
What was your role then in that case, or did it always change, or was it?
Well, it changed a lot. The first time I went to Afghanistan, basically what Green Berets do, they build an army up from scratch, right? We took local militia in Afghanistan who wanted to fight the Taliban, and we built an army, like 8 of us, right? And it's funny because we went into this remote village and we said, hey, we're building an army to fight the Taliban. Come tomorrow for in-processing and bring your own gun because we don't have a gun for you. So these guys had come and they'd have an AK-47 and a couple of mags. And
Ocean supplied.
yeah, and we train them in basic infantry tactics. We go hit a target. We take the weapons off the target, redistribute them again, hit another one. We paid them and all that. And we basically, a small team of 8, 12 guys can build a battalion with 120 guys, a couple of hundred guys of militia. And they're not super sophisticated. They're just enough to get the job done because we don't want to train them too well because we probably end up fighting them later on. So
is that how it works? Do you just leave the town and the Taliban come in and they flip? Or was there any guarantee that these people would?
Most of these guys had been super disgruntled by the Taliban. They'd been, I don't know if this is appropriate for your podcast, but you can cut it out if you want. I remember talking to one of these militia guys, and he told us that when he was a kid growing up in Afghanistan, the local Taliban commander raped him. And
it was the norm, the T-boys.
It was the norm, right? But then he told us when the Americans came in, and he joined the Northern Alliance and he fought with the Americans. And when they took Kandahar, he went and found this guy, and he raped him back. This is what he told us. Yeah. So yeah, he didn't put it in that nice a language, but yeah. So most of them and we were paying them, and as long as you're paying them, and now obviously we all know how Afghanistan turned out, but that was not due to the soldiers on the ground. That was due to the politics, much like Vietnam, right? You can only control so much.
You can't instill a value or like a what's the word? I watched a really excellent documentary called "This Is What Winning Looks Like."
Yeah,
and it was 10 years before the one. Excellent, really well made. But it was kind of just saying like you can't instill a governance system on like a Bedouin nomadic.
You can't. Way. Yeah, you can't put American values on Afghans. And you look at it this way, right? You go into a small village, 200 people, and number one, that tribal leader does not understand why he's paying taxes to Kabul, which is corrupt as hell, that do nothing for him. He'll pay that money to the Taliban, and Taliban will provide security for him, right? Yeah. Now, if he doesn't pay that money, they'll cut his head off, get somebody else. Like, it's a no-win situation, right?
Yeah.
And we poured billions of dollars into Afghanistan and spilt a lot of blood, our own and other people's, and left it worse than we found it. Like, let's just be honest, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And I hope the American government learned from it that this nation-building BS does not work. You can't put this American system on some of these cultures that just don't want it. Iraq was a little different. So I went to Afghanistan. I went to Iraq. In Iraq...
Yeah, what year, sorry? Can you give me a time frame?
I went to Afghanistan in 2004. I was on the Special Forces qualification course after selection for about a year. I trained as an 18 Bravo, which is a Special Forces weapons sergeant. And I got to a team and went to Afghanistan right off the bat. And it was still the Wild West when I got there. It was very early on in the conflict. There was no Afghan army. It was all militia units. The Taliban had been beaten down. They hadn't fully resurfaced yet. But we got in a lot of conflicts. We were talking about IEDs and bombs and stuff. I remember driving out to a village, and when we got in there, we talked to the village elder, and he said, "Did you see that bomb on the road? There was an IED or a roadside bomb on the road." And we're like, "That road that we just drove on?" And we went back and looked, and there was like, I think 9 or 10 artillery shells buried under the road. And we drove across it, and the firing mechanism was in low ground, and it had rained the night before, so it got wet, and that's the only reason it didn't fire. It just wasn't our time, right? So It was very, very Wild Westish back then. And I learned a lot, but we lost some folks out, and we were in a lot of gunfights, and it basically it's all about air power, right? It's you're fighting people on the ground with small arms fire until you call Apache gunships, and then it flips, right? So they knew our response times even at that time, that they would engage and break contact before our air would get there. But that was the great advantage was air power, right? So I spent about 6 months in Afghanistan, and I came back, immediately went to Iraq. The invasion of Iraq happened in 2003, went to Iraq.
Sorry, did you have the choice, or you were deployed?
No, my team, I was in the 3rd Special Forces team, and we came back, and we were back for a couple of months, and then we deployed again to Iraq, because at the time, we were training the Iraqi army, which we decimated, again, mistakes. We decimated the Iraqi army, and we're rebuilding them up to kind of fight their own fight. And I spent 9 months in Iraq, train, assist, advise, and accompany Iraqi infantry on missions and targets and hits and all kinds of spectrum of stuff. Went back home. It wasn't back long. Went back again. And at this point, I'd moved to a higher tiered element special ops unit, and I was training the Iraqi counter-terrorist force and the emergency response unit of the Baghdad police. And again, train, assist, advise, hit targets, do all that stuff. And then came back and went back again and did unilateral operations with high level, going after high value targets, kill capture missions, with all the assets you could imagine for
Are we talking like, again, I have such a basic knowledge, but are we talking like the likes of the type of missions that would see like capturing, what's his name? Bin Laden, it's the covert.
It's JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, which is this is open source stuff. It's Delta Force, it's SEAL Team 6, and I was never in Delta Force, but I was in a unit in 3rd Group that worked some of the same mission types. Ranger Regiment, very high value, going after kill capture high value targets
on the ground behind enemy lines, basically.
Yeah, well, everything was enemy lines in Iraq, but on the ground, but massive amounts of firepower, phenomenal intelligence, and it was part of the surge where they surged people in, and they had them in. It's actually it's a success story for Iraq. When I left Iraq in 2008, we were winning. We were losing when I got there, and I did 3 or 4 trips in Iraq. But when I got there initially, we were losing the war, and everybody knew it. And by the time we left, because of multiple strategies, we were actually winning. And we built up the Iraqi counter-terrorist force, who were the only ones who stood and fought when ISIS rolled into northern Iraq. The Iraqi counter-terrorist force that we had built and trained and equipped, they were the ones that stopped them in their tracks and died in big numbers. They call it the ISOF Brigade now. Very well trained, very motivated guys. Like really good soldiers. Most of them spoke English. Very, very. Those guys were great to work with. So they were the ones who stopped ISIS. So that was a good thing. So when I hit 2008, I've been deploying back to back, and I had 4 kids, and I hadn't seen my kids. One of my daughters, my youngest daughter, was born in 2004, and she was like 3 or 4 years old before I had to rebond with her. Like it really did. It was hard, right? But I was so focused on work, and I carry on.
I'd imagine these deployments just, they take a toll. They take something with
They do.
home, or so it's how do you be a normal person?
Well, you're not. When you come back, you're training for the next. Man, you're going to schools and you're catching up. And I had to go to sniper school, and I had to go to military freefall school, and I had to go to a hostage rescue CQB school. I had to, you're catching up on schools, and you're training for the next deployment, right? So it consumes your life. And I carry a lot of guilt to this day about not being there for my family, but it was at that time that the job suffers last in a lot of these cases. And that's the wrong answer. You have to strike a balance, or you'll pay for it. Now, I luckily have a very strong wife, and I have great kids, so she basically held the fort down, and military spouses in that scenario have to be very, very strong. But in 2008,
before I will get there, but was there a part of you that kind of you hungered for it? Because I think
I did. I loved this. I loved it. I loved it. In 2008, if you're the most senior guy in your MOS, right? So I was the most senior 18 Bravo weapons sergeant in the company. So they made me go. I'm sorry, military occupation specialty, right? So Green Berets, they have 4 basic jobs: communications, engineer, medic, and weapons, right? And then you have a team sergeant, you have an intel sergeant, you have a warrant officer, and officer, right? So it's a 12-man team, but you rarely have 12. But when you're the senior guy, they'll make you go and be an instructor for a couple of years, and you can't get out. I tried to get out of it, and I couldn't. When they hit me, so they wanted me in '08 to become a sniper instructor at the Special Forces Sniper Course, and it turned out
In America?
No, in America, yeah, here in Fort Bragg, where I'm still am, and to teach Delta Force, Ranger Regiment, and Green Beret snipers. That's what I trained for 3 years. I didn't want to go. I want to stay on my team. I want to go back to Iraq, and I fought it and tried to get around it and I couldn't. And they basically set me, and it really did help me. Number one, it let me take a knee, let me spend more time at home, and it was a freaking great job. I learned. I had to go be a sniper instructor for 3 years, and there's no getting out of it. You have to go. So I went kicking and screaming, and I had a phenomenal time. This journey that doesn't have anything to do with the Troubles. I'm just telling you.
It's an interesting story. Yeah, that's why I'm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got to be a sniper instructor. So it's funny because when I was there for about a year as an instructor, I got an invite back to the Ranger Wing in Ireland to an international counter-terrorist sniper course. And I got to go back to Ireland for 3 weeks and do sniper stuff in the Curragh camp as an American Green Beret 10 years after I left that unit. It was kind of cool. But I actually ran sniper school. The last year I was there, they put me in charge. So I ran sniper school. And then when I was done, I was a master sergeant, and I went back to 3rd Group to be a team sergeant in charge of a team. So I was there for 2 years, and I did some more deployments while I was there. And then I took over a leadership school for special operations for junior non-commissioned officers, and I ran that when I was the first one. I ran that school for 2 years, and then I finished off my career running all the force modernization for special forces, right? So I ran a shop that dealt with modernizing all the equipment: guns, bullets, optics, trucks, uniforms, NBC gear, drones, counter drone, massive. I was in control of millions of dollars and hundreds of programs. And although it was a frustrating staff job, I learned a lot. And then in 2020, I retired after 24 years in the Army. And I went working for a company called Fieldcraft Survival for a couple of years, and then I just broke out and I do my own thing now. I do training, I do this podcast, my podcast, and I have some YouTube stuff, but I basically train citizens, and I do a lot of different things. Like I've been teaching land navigation, I've been teaching firearms, I've been teaching long range shooting. I teach long range shooting to law enforcement, sniper stuff. A bunch of different things, but I had a very long career between 2 different countries and 2 different special operations, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment.
It sounds like you've done upwards of 7 or 8 countries with like a high scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny that the Troubles was your first, I guess, introduction to that, and even it would have been very different, if you were in Northern Ireland at the time.
It would have been, yeah.
Fascinating story. It's great that you can have it and leave it behind as well.
I can. I move on. I don't want my life to be tied to that, right? It's my background. It is what it is. And I did on my podcast. I walked through every step of the way. Basically, I did 12 1-hour podcasts, just me talking about. Okay, then I went here and I did this and I did this and I did this. And people want to hear all these war stories about shooting people and all that, and I don't talk about that.
Everyone wants to ask a question.
Well, here's the well, there's no context to it now, right? You can't explain to people why you shot somebody from a roof in Iraq with night vision goggles in the middle of a curfew while he was maneuvering. It's just too hard to explain, and you don't want to sound like one of these gung-ho assholes that are all over the internet running about, I shot this guy and that guy, and they're all full of shit, right? And I did a podcast about Somalia, and I did talk about some stuff, and my wife was like, you might not want to do that because you weren't even in a government. You were a hired gun. And look at British soldiers being prosecuted for what they did in Bloody Sunday, right? And they're all old men in their freaking 80s, and they're trying to prosecute them, right? Now, what they did was fucking unacceptable, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility that I'll be fucking here and somebody will go back to Iraq and get interview some people and one-sided information. I just don't like talking about it anyway. it is what it is. I've been in gunfights, and I've had to do things.
Yeah, yeah.
But it is what it is. It's I have no regrets about anything I did. I'd do it again right now. And I never did anything that I wouldn't. I never did anything that didn't need to be.
You wouldn't stand by. Yeah. No, I know. It sounds like
stand by everything.
short.
I would stand by everything. Well, I would stand by everything because it is what it is. Move on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, what I was going to say is, from my limited knowledge of meeting soldiers, meeting U.S. soldiers, I guess. There was one instance of a guy who I met was just super disillusioned to feel like he just wasted his youth to go and fight a war that didn't make any sense. And then another guy I met, like, at a baseball game, and he was like, this is the first time I've been able to be at a baseball game, and I'm not just looking for cover everywhere.
Yeah.
I was coming back and reintegrating to being a normal person.
See, that's not
a lot of people. That's not okay. It's a different cup of tea. Yeah.
It is. And as part of my retirement, I had to go talk to a shrink. And, I sat down and I was pretty honest. And she asked you, did you shoot people? Yes. Did you kill people? Yes. Did you see people die? Did you? And they go through the whole gamut. And she asked me to tell her a couple of stories, and I did. And I said, look, let me stop you right there. I have no regrets about anything I did. If you put me on that roof right now, I would do the same thing again. And I have no PTSD. It's not on my medical records at all. I have traumatic brain injury from explosions. I've been blown up a couple of times. So that sometimes my short-term memory is jacked up. But and I have multiple injuries from wear and tear for years and years and years. So I think honestly, Oisin, I think that going to sniper school to be an instructor and getting me off the battlefield,
easing out.
I think that helped me. That one thing that helped me. Another thing that helped me is I don't drink. I drank as a young man. I don't drink now. And you get these guys who are in special operations that have been to war and they go at 100 miles an hour for years, and then all of a sudden they're retired and they sit at home watching TV, and then they start pouring alcohol on it, and they have no sense of purpose, and it crushes them. I never took a day off. I came right out of the army. I was working before I left the army in this other job I was doing. And I maintained the same pace that I maintained my whole freaking life. And I don't know if I'll ever stop, but
I'm high base, but I can respect also. Yeah,
I'm high energy. I'm not one of these guys that sits around kind of, and I'm not one of these guys who sticks his back to the walls and looks for exits and all. I don't do any of that. I mean, it's just not me. I'm not belittling those folks who do that. I don't know where that comes from. I think part of it's training. I think part of it's baked in your DNA. And I think, your experiences are your experiences. But, and I think my career stretched such a long path, right? By the time I got in my first real gunfight, I was 7 years in the Irish Army. I was very well trained. I was years in the American Army. It wasn't like I came in and went to basic training. I did a little bit of this, and all of a sudden, I'm in a gunfight in Afghanistan. I was very mature. I was very well trained, and I'd been around so much. Maybe that's, and I'm speculating, maybe that helped.
Yeah, but it makes sense, to be honest. I think gradual in and gradual out, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have no regrets, because regrets would, it would.
The east
kind of that road leads nowhere, but everything I did led me to where I am right now, and I'm freaking really happy right now. I have an awesome wife, I have awesome kids, and I have a pretty cool life, and I get to talk to guys like you, man, which is awesome.
Yeah, well, look, I think that kind of brings us to a natural end of the conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed. If people want to listen to more of your stuff, where do they get you? Have a minute.
So I have an Instagram account, kevin.p.owens. I have a YouTube account by the same name, Kevin Owens. You can see it there. And then I have the podcast is Overmatch, which is my company name, the Kevin Owens Podcast. I was trying to think of a better name, but that's kind of where it goes. And I don't like to do a lot of the things other people do. And I like to kind of change it up a little, because there's a lot of podcasts out there. But yeah, go follow me, hit me up. I have a lot of following in Ireland. A big portion of the people who follow me are from Ireland. And they reach out all the time. And it's funny, because they're like, do you know this guy? And I'm like, yep, I know him. It's a small country, but yeah, I served with him. But no, I really enjoyed the conversation. And
Thank you, Kevin. It's been a pleasure.
Yep. And I love your podcast.